Today I would like to discuss prayer as articulated by Joel Goldsmith in his wonderful book, The Infinite Way. Now you hear me say this a lot. Desire points to being that. You are already that. You know that you are that through desire. You desire to be that. Nothing wrong with you. You are already that, which is prior to all these things, existing as fulfillment or perfection. You know that you are that in the silence. You are completely fulfilled in the silence. You are that perfection in the silence. Yet, in consciousness is where you experience that perfection, that fulfillment. Now, you might not desire to experience that perfection or that fulfillment in consciousness, which is completely fine. You may desire to experience that perfection or that fulfillment in consciousness, which is completely fine. One way is not better than the other. These kinds of thoughts of this versus that, this way being better than another, I no longer identify with them. And I say, your way is the best way. So I like the way Joel Goldsmith articulates. He's saying the same thing. He says, true prayer is never addressed to a being outside ourselves, nor does true prayer expect anything from outside our own being. The kingdom of God is within you, and all good must be sought there, recognizing God to be the reality of our being. We know that all good is inherent in that being, our being and mine. God is the substance of our being, and therefore we are entire, self-sustained, and harmonious. God is life and is self-sustained. God is the consciousness of the individual, and this constitutes the intelligence of our being. Or the way I like to say it is pure consciousness, as stated in Genesis 1:3. This is the Peshitta Aramaic Bible translation. And God said, the light shall be, and the light was. And God said, the light shall be, and the light was. I am that pure awareness, and the light is pure consciousness prior to the individual placing conditions upon consciousness that restrict the flow of that intelligence. We can dissolve those conditions through the calling, the desire to experience more of that perfection, that fulfillment. Why else do you desire? You desire to know who you are and be as you are. And as there is no limit to that perfection, that fulfillment, you can, if you'd like, experience more of that perfection, more of that fulfillment in form, as all these wonderful things. All these things that have been created in the beginning. Again, the Peshitta Aramaic Bible translation. And God said, the light shall be, and the light was. Have you noticed that you simply accept that you are that which you desire to be? You have what you desire. Desire points to being. Desire points to having that which you desire to have. And what do you notice? Interestingly, all these things, which are symbols of that fulfillment, are spontaneously added onto you by grace and grace alone. He says, rightly speaking, there is not God and you, but God is ever manifest as you. And this is the oneness which assures you of infinite good. Infinite good. That is all you desire. You desire to experience that infinite good. Yet that good is infinite. So no matter what part of that infinite good you desire to experience in form, whatever it may be, successful business, relationship, etc., there's more to that than that which you experience from that. And no shame, no condemnation. It's not like there's a person saying, oh, you should not experience more of that perfection. That would be shaming and condemning. Why would I say to you, you cannot experience that perfection? The promises of God. He says, God is the life, mind, body, and substance of individual being. Therefore, nothing can be added to any individual. This is an interesting nuanced point we'll explore. And true prayer is the constant recognition of this truth. In other words, you already have what you desire. You are already that which you desire to be. Desire points to being. Desire points to having that. Continuous awareness, he says, of our true being, of the infinite nature and character of our only being, this too is prayer. In this consciousness, that pure consciousness bliss prior to these conditions, beyond identification to thoughts of lack or limitation of not being, that consciousness, he says, instead of seeking, asking, waiting in prayer, we turn our thought inward and listen for the still small voice, which assures us that even before we asked, our Father knew and fulfilled our need. It actually says that in Matthew 6:8. For your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask them. So a person may think that they need to convince themselves and do all these things to try to convince themselves of having that what they desire, being that which they desire to be. Meanwhile, prior to the individual that tries to convince themselves, they are already that. You are already that pure awareness, and in that consciousness, the pure consciousness, you know you are that. You know you are that in the silence. You know you are that in the stillness. And when you know that you are that in the silence and you know that you are that in the stillness, the still small voice, intuition arises, and you know what to do, what not to do, what to say, what not to say, etc. So you may pray for what to say in a particular business deal. Well, here's an example. A while back, I went into the silence, and an idea emerged. It's an interesting idea, and it emerged in this way, and I'm going to talk about it in a moment. He actually says this, and I'll relate this to what I'm going to share right now. So what happened was, I had a client that was a consulting client, yet they also offered consulting service. So I asked my client if they offered consulting about pricing. Yet I had an idea to book a session with my client, and part of it was I wanted him to have his offer page up, and I also wanted to be his first client to discuss this particular topic because I feel that he is very good at discussing that area. So I said to him, I said, can I build a offer page for you and put a buy now button and buy your consulting and then have a conversation with you with something that I would like to explore with you? And he was like, okay, this is the first time. First time someone had asked me to do something like this. And hey, it can be very non-linear like this. The ways of God are past finding out. Yet if intuition says, move forward with this step or do this thing or don't do that thing, I don't hesitate. I do the thing. So I did the thing. I booked a session with him, and we had a conversation about pricing. And then after that, I had a conversation with another prospect, and I offered the new pricing for that service, and that became the new pricing for that service. Now, I say this a lot. People, environments, information, everything appears to be in harmony with you as you are in harmony with all. And it plays out as a play or a theater. Entrepreneurship is a theater. It really is. It's a play. I create a product or service. I offer it to somebody. They give me wonderful compensation. I deliver on that service. Then I have another idea for an additional product or service to create for them. God does all these things. I just listen to intuition, and the prayers are answered. So you go into the silence, and the still small voice provides exactly what to do, what not to do, because the Father knows before you ask. So I want to relate this over to what Joel had mentioned in the same chapter in a moment. We'll talk about that a little later on. He says, here's the great secret of prayer, that God is all in all, and God is forever manifested. There is no unmanifested good or God. That which we seem to be seeking is ever present within us, and already manifested. All good already is and is forever manifested. The recognition of this truth is answered prayer. The Bible reveals to us the basic truth of being, namely, that God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Again, key point. God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. In this all good that God made, there is nothing that defieth or maketh a lie, and there is no other creative principle. It becomes clear then that whatever is unlike God, error, sin, disease, pain, and discord, is illusion, mirage, or nothingness. There comes a time in our experience when spiritual inspiration reveals to individual consciousness a state of being free of mental confessions and beliefs. Then we no longer live a life of mental affirmations and denials, but rather receive constant unfoldment of truth from consciousness. Again, I am that pure awareness. My real nature is pure consciousness. You know what to do, what not to do, what to say, what not to say. All these things happen spontaneously, naturally, and effortlessly in flow. That is just the way that is. Now he says also, it may come through a book or lecture or service imparted by divine consciousness. Regardless of the seeming channel through which it may come, it is the divine consciousness revealing itself to individual consciousness. So, whatever way it appears, the answer, whatever way it appears, works. Or as I say sometimes, whatever works. Why does it need to appear this way or that way? It could appear as a solution that you move forward with, and that is completely fine. It could emerge as an idea, you take a particular step and you do this thing or that thing, and many benefit greatly from it. I benefited greatly from it. My clients that I offered the service to benefited greatly from it. And this client, I became a client, the first client for this particular offer, and they got to go through a particular experience of running that particular offer with me, and they benefited greatly, I benefited greatly, so everyone benefited greatly. That could be considered a very radically non-linear approach, unheard of. Now, I've shared on this channel many different non-linear, radical, completely different approaches that I did not read in a business book. Although I did apply things that I read in a business book, what matters is the truth. The truth matters. So it can appear in a book. It could appear in a conversation. It could appear as a revolutionary idea or something that has never been done before, which is completely fine. Completely fine. So he says, prayer, which is conscious oneness with God, always results in bringing forth harmony, peace, joy, success. These are the things added, as stated in the Bible. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And as I always say, added unto you by grace and grace alone. It is a wonderful play. Wonderful play, because fundamentally, only God alone exists. Only God alone plays all roles in perfect harmony. It just appears for the individual as resistance when they try to control things because they think that reality is not in harmony with them. So again, no shame, no condemnation. As he had said in the beginning, recognizing God to be the reality of our being, we know that all good is inherent in that being. That is the absolute reality. And you already abide in that absolute reality. We just don't identify with these conditions. The thoughts of needing to do this or that in order to be that. You are already that prior to the individual trying to be that, needing to be that, doing this or that in order to be that. These conditions that generated the illusions of limitation or illusions of separation, which in the earlier stages of entrepreneurship, it seemed like I was doing a lot more, trying to do a lot more in order to get results. And then what started to happen, which is the natural way, which is the way, is these things started to naturally, effortlessly, spontaneously emerge. And now the question might be, what did you do? What did you not do? What I did not do happened naturally and effortlessly in flow. It happens that way in flow. That is all you need to know. And by that it is meant, you are that. Prior to all these conditions fall away. So as he says here, communion with God is true prayer. So you are already that prior to all these things, beyond all these things, beyond the thoughts of limitation. That is what he's referring to as communion with God is true prayer. It is the unfoldment in individual consciousness of his presence and power. And it makes you every whit whole. Communion with God is in reality listening for the still small voice. In this communion or prayer, no words pass from you to God, but the consciousness of the presence of God is realized as the impartation of truth, and love comes from God within to you. It is a holy state of being. As I always say, you are whole, you are complete, you are that perfection, you are that fulfillment. It just doesn't appear that way, or the individual doesn't think that they are that, because it is the individual that thinks that, or the individual that suggests that it doesn't appear that way. Yet I am that prior to this individual. I spring from the sure foundation that I am pure awareness, and I know in the silence that my real nature is bliss. I am that pure light, thus, of consciousness, that pure being, pure consciousness. That is my real nature. Again, Genesis 1:3. And God said, the light shall be, and the light was, as it was in the beginning, now, and ever shall be. The light is that pure consciousness prior to these conditions. So he says, it is a holy state of being and never leaves us where it finds us. Now let's zone in on this part here where he says, communion with God is true prayer. It is the unfoldment in individual consciousness of his presence and power. So here's a way of articulating it from experience. I posted this in the school community. If you're interested in the school community that I created, I'll link in the description to it. I had the inspiration in the morning. This is the interesting thing. The still small voice, it just emerges with these ideas and you articulate it. So the articulation was, we seemingly fell from unimaginable bliss, dreaming our return back to bliss. I am that prior to these appearances I play with. You are that prior to these appearances you play with. You never forget you are that prior to all these things appearing to be in perfect harmony. And no matter how perfect they seem on the surface, you are still that prior to all these things, witnessing even greater perfection appearing to play out, symbolizing our return to eternal and never-ending bliss. We enjoy these appearances, we play with these appearances, yet we are still that which has no identification with these appearances, which are appearing by grace and grace alone. And as you no longer identify with the conditions placed upon consciousness that suggest that you need to hold on or control, you lack, there's limitations. What happens is more of these appearances, I can honestly say, more of these appearances which are symbols of that greater perfection, that greater fulfillment, that greater bliss appear in some shape or form. Harmonious relationships, harmonious business, more so. It's never-ending bliss. Another way of saying this is you are just surrendering into bliss. And as you surrender, more bliss appears, yet I do not form an identity around those appearances. I play with those appearances. I enjoy those appearances. And then they are surrendered, and then the next degree or the next level or a higher degree of that perfection, that fulfillment, as it is never-ending bliss, never-ending fulfillment, never-ending good. So you never have to settle for less. Why would you do that? It's up to you if you want to do that. Yet the heart desires more of that perfection of God, that fulfillment of God. And then that may generate confusion in the individual's mind and body. They try to hold on to the appearances which are appearing to transform to reflect a higher degree of perfection. They form identities around the appearances because they think that that's the highest degree of perfection or highest degree of fulfillment, which is illusory. That is infinite perfection. That is infinite bliss. That is infinite fulfillment, and you are that. So like Joseph Murphy had said, desire is prayer. And Mark 11:24, pray as though ye have received it, as in you already have it. Desire points to being. That, you are already that, which you desire to be. Not because I said so. You know that. You know that in the silence. You know that you are completely fulfilled in the silence. You know that you are complete perfection in the silence, not because somebody said so. Well, if someone says so, then you can say, oh yeah, I know that. I know that. You know that, they know that, we all know that. That which is prior to all these appearances. Now that appears more so. That appears more so. So when he says, communion with God, that, identify with that, that is true identity. Now what does that mean? Identify with that. You are that which is aware of this, any kind of attempt to identify with that. So that's why he was saying earlier that perhaps in the earlier stages, the individual was living a life of mental affirmations and denials, rather than receiving constant unfoldments of truth from consciousness or higher realizations of that perfection. Can one receive within, via the still small voice, that acknowledgement of what they are, the next level? Yes, through desire. For example, if someone sets a definite chief aim, they know that they are that which they desire to be through that desire, and they know what it looks like in imagination. So they set a definite chief aim. That definite chief aim allows them or facilitates more ease for the individual to remain on course. So they can say, I don't allow my attention to drift onto anything else, only on what is related to my vision. Now that can be helpful in the earlier stages, as it was for me, as what would happen was conditions placed upon consciousness or beliefs or programming, I would become identified with it, or I was about to become identified with it, and I knew that they were conditions. They were beliefs stored in the subconscious mind, and then they dissolved by not identifying with them. And what happened was the manifestation of that definite chief aim. My first one was to get out of $50,000 debt by imagining that I have $25,000 in my bank account. So along the way, the conditions were released, which were generating the suffering, the resistance. And what happened is I manifested, or I actualized that vision of having $25,000 in the bank account, and the conditions fell away. So along the way, a person may affirm that they are that which they desire to be and not identify with the conditions that suggest otherwise, as mentioned. That's what Napoleon Hill called auto-suggestion. And the auto-suggestions also deny the conditions from being identified with, as if you suggest that money flows effortless and easy to me, then how can you identify with the belief that it's a result of stress or frustration? So mind purification. Then, interestingly, we come to the realization that we were just dissolving all these conditions along the way, and all these things were being added onto us by grace and grace alone. So surrendering into bliss, that I am prior to all these things. That is pure consciousness. I am aware of my real nature in the silence. Now I am aware of my real nature in flow and day-to-day experiences, as that appears more so as higher degrees of perfection or bliss or fulfillment. So practically speaking, we can look at it this way. Your attention, having realized that to a high degree, having dissolved these conditions in the subconscious mind, and no longer identifying with these conditions, or less and less identifying with these conditions, your attention naturally, effortlessly, without trying to do this or that, without affirming this or denying that, your attention naturally reveals more of that perfection. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. More of that perfection, more of that fulfillment, more of that bliss, more of that, as whatever, relationships, friendships, life experiences. Also, for example, when I go for a run, sometimes in the morning, it'll seem like the blades of grass are dancing with me. These kinds of things which I might not have noticed before, that I was one with the blades of grass, that I am in complete harmony, seeing God in all things. I did not see it before, because those conditions were distorting the perfection that is, the perfection that is. And that's why I can describe it also as surrendering to bliss, just dropping the conditions. One of my clients, she's a member of Flow-Based Prosperity, Kate Findley. She discovered by surrendering into more of that bliss, which practically speaking means do what you love to do. Essentially, if you allow yourself to do what you love to do, that is a practical form or a practical way of surrendering into that bliss, because essentially you are surrendering into that bliss, letting go of that which you don't genuinely desire to do. So what she discovered was what she really loves to do is creating, writing, building tools, and bringing ideas to life in ways that deeply connect with people. And I can honestly say she is phenomenal at doing it, because the real self naturally shines forth. And what she realized is that generating the traffic, the audience, etc., is best done through some kind of partnership. And then she also became very clear that clarity emerged as to the kind of individuals she would like to partner with, do business with, etc. And people started to reach out to her to connect in this area. So in entrepreneurship, there are many ways of doing business. You just do what you love to do. There are partnership deals, strategic alliances, profit split, revenue splits, where you do what you love to do and people do what they love to do. So that is a higher degree of bliss. It feels lighter and lighter. By the way, if you're interested in connecting with Kate, she's always mutually harmonious and mutually beneficial as she lives this way. I'll link in the description to her link tree. And if you're curious about what she's working on and maybe you see a collaborative fit, you can connect with her there. So I am that prior to these appearances that I play with. Doesn't mean that I have to ignore this world or pretend like it's not there. What appears in this world, from the premise of being that which you already are, as you know that, and you don't identify with thoughts or limitation, is more experiences of that fulfillment, that bliss, that perfection. It just appears more so. You may imagine what it looks like, you may not. I don't have a preference, actually. Someone says, should I imagine? Should I just feel that bliss? Look, it all happens by grace and grace alone, because inevitably you realize that fundamentally only God alone exists. God alone exists, presenting God in this world as all these wonderful things in perfect harmony. It just doesn't appear that way through the conditioning. So I surrendered the conditioning. And then I can play with these experiences, these appearances, enjoy them. Enjoy life, simply put. Enjoy life, celebrate life. Yet I do not form an identity around these appearances. And I communicated this in the first video, actually, on my channel, which I released in 2013, where I talked about how even though I built my IT business to a success, I still got rid of everything. One could say, why didn't you just, buy this and buy that and whatever, which is completely fine. Why do I have to do that when you get a particular degree of success? What if the desire, the still small voice said, get rid of everything? That is the way that is, the best way. So I ended up buying a one-way ticket, going to Austria, got involved with consulting, started the YouTube channel. Everything worked out perfectly. Now, connecting the dots, looking backwards, I could say, okay, what did I do? I just surrendered those appearances. I didn't form an identity around them. It's not to say, oh, if you get whatever X amount of dollars, you get this or that. Now, you have to further identify with it. That's illusory. You're prior to these appearances. Yes, they're wonderful appearances that you manifested, that manifested by grace and grace alone. Maybe suffering at times, as there was conditions identified with, yet you released those conditions. Yet that perfection of God, that fulfillment of God, it's greater than these appearances. It's infinitely greater. So I don't form an identity around these appearances. Now, if an individual wants to form an identity around the appearances, it's up to them. You have the ability to choose if you would like to form an identity around the appearances or not. So having formed no identity around those appearances, what naturally emerged was the next phase of the entrepreneurial endeavor. Business consulting, the YouTube channel, etc., etc. And although I can say that it is greater perfection or more fulfillment, I can honestly say at that time, prior to starting that video, that is what I called the highest fulfillment or the highest perfection that I experienced. Now I can say, oh, this, what I experience now, is the highest fulfillment or the highest perfection. Yet that's never ending, which proves the point. It just never ends. So I surrender these conditions, whatever conditions. I stop trying to be this or that. I stop trying to do this or that to try to hold on to the appearances less and less over the years. I worry less. One could even say I care less. By that it is meant very specifically, nuanced point. I care for everyone more by worrying less. Things happen to be taken care of by grace and grace alone. God plays all roles. By worrying less, by trying less, by surrendering into that bliss, knowing that I am that bliss. And that might not make any sense to the person in mind. It might not make any sense, but that's okay. The person in mind is trying to make sense of it, no shame and condemnation, yet I am that prior to this person in mind, existing as bliss. So you know what you're surrendering to. You're surrendering to that perfection, that fulfillment, that bliss. Now, that bliss does take form as all these wonderful experiences, all these wonderful appearances. Yet I am that still prior to all these experiences and appearances. Thus, It appears as an unfolding of your ideal dream life. Your ideal dream life. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You could say, I am that prior to all these appearances I play with. All these wonderful appearances and experiences of my fulfillment, my perfection, I play with. Yet I remain as I am prior to all these experiences, all these appearances, witnessing greater forms of my inherent fulfillment, my inherent perfection, appearing by grace and grace alone. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.